You are listening to the Bat Flip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damian, here with my co-host, Matt. We are finally coming back to you on December 22nd of 2021. Sorry for the delay on the episode. I was battling a head cold, and I thought I was getting over it. And then a couple days later, I ended up getting the flu, and it took me out for basically all of last week. I was basically sick in bed. And so I could not put the energy and the focus I needed to put in on the show to make this what we do. But we're back now. Hopefully we're gonna get some going into this new year. We'll improve for you guys and be more consistent on that. But anyways, before we jump into everything we have going on this show, how you doing, Matt?
Doing pretty good. Fortunately, I haven't had the flu or cold so far. Knock on wood.
I do not
Um,
recommend it.
yeah, I know it's not fun, but I've been just patiently waiting. We were able to not be super in a hurry about our episodes because nothing's been happening since the last episode we had. We had that week there was stuff happen, but then since then it's been lockout, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So literally nothing is happening in MLB. There's been a couple little minor league contract signed, which is legal right now, and then it's also legal to sign overseas. So that's been going on a little bit too. But there's been very little news come out other than there's a couple manager hirings out of actual MLB. So definitely definitely slow the last couple weeks, but we're doing we're going to catch up this week. We have the ability to catch up because of how slow it's been. So we're going to bring you a good little bit of analysis on what happened in that last week before the lockout, and what's going to happen going forward here.
Yeah, so I think our last episode was, I think, the day before the lockout, on the non-tender deadline. There was really no big names that got non-tendered. I think we were looking before the show, like Richard Rodriguez, who was one of the big trade deadline names that the Braves acquired. He was non-tendered, but outside of that, there was just really no other big names. Nothing like we had the past year or two come out from that. We're going to get into the rest of the free agents, like you said, that we either happened the night of we were recording or that lockout day. We'll talk about the manager hirings and then just a little bit of the lockout talk and kind of what's been being said and what to look forward to. But we'll go ahead and just dive right in and start with the Joey Wendle getting traded from the Tampa Bay Rays to the Miami Marlins for outfield prospect Cameron Meisner.
Yeah, so this is a pretty interesting trade for sure. Joey Wendell is actually a pretty decent player. He's kind of a role player type guy. 2021 had a good season, put up almost 3 wins above replacement. 265, 319, 422 line. Slightly above league average hitter. He's pretty versatile. He can play different positions on the infield, and he's a good defensive player, kind of wherever he's at. He can play short, plays third, plays second. He's a pretty solid, contact-oriented, everyday player. A little bit of speed, can steal some bases. Um, his career year in 2018 put up 4 WAR. He's just a kind of a solid, everyday, or solid bench type player, utility guy. The give up for that was a guy who is actually a pretty decent looking prospect in Cameron Meisner. He's a guy who is, um, he's a guy who is a very much a power, a power speed type guy. Um, he's actually a 45 future value on Fangraphs, the number 10 prospect now for the Rays. Can do some good things. He's an outfielder. Um, put up decent numbers in the minor leagues. His strikeout rate's a little bit high. Um, just a 244 average in high A this year, but good walk rate at over 12% and hits the ball hard, hits for some power, definitely can steal some bases. So a guy who I think you could definitely say this trade was worth for the Rays as they have such a logjam on their infield that they really don't need some of these guys anyways.
Yeah, and then especially with the emergence of Wander Franco, and I think even Taylor Walls is going to get a lot of playing time this year. and you still have a guy like Brandon Lau kind of holding down second base. It made Wendell expendable. And to go to for the Marlins, it's a good trade. You trade an outfield prospect for a guy who has a couple years of club control. He can be a solid piece on a contending team, as we've seen him be with the Tampa Bay Rays already. And before the whole lockout, they had him, or no, it was actually after they had him on MLB Network on the MLB radio. It is, and he said that even from the little initial conversations that he had, in the little time he had talking to Don Mattingly, they even see him as maybe being an everyday third baseman for the Marlins. So that's going to be interesting to see going forward if what's happening there with like a Brian Anderson or whatever. But it's a solid get for the Tampa Bay Rays and a prospect, like you said, a big power and speed type guy. If they were able to cut down his strikeouts, I never doubt the Tampa Bay Rays being able to find out what's wrong with the prospect. If, nothing that, not that there is anything wrong, but to be able to, make him do what he does even better. I don't put it past the Rays one bit to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. And we'll see what happens there. I'm never somebody who believes that guys who are in that same situation end up typically becoming really good big leaguers. High strikeouts at a lower level like that. But every now and then one will hit, and the Rays are a team that doesn't seem to be super scared of high strikeout guys like that. They're a pretty strikeout. They're a pretty strikeout heavy team, and they are able to to get away with that. So definitely something to look for, and a guy to look for in the future.
Absolutely. Well, we'll move on. And this one, we're kind of just going to group like three kind of moves together, but we'll obviously, spend the time we need to talk about it because there is a pretty big one in here. And that's the Chicago Cubs added starting pitcher Marcus Stroman on a 3-year, $71 million deal with an opt out after year two. They signed catcher Jan Gomes to a 2-year, $13 million deal that also has a club option. And they signed former Yankee Clint Frazier on a 1-year major league deal.
Yeah, so these were very interesting moves for the Cubs. Clint Frazier is a guy that um, has at times shown his talent at the big league level. He was a top prospect. Ironically enough, I believe he was with the Cubs when he was a prospect. No, sorry, he was with
Was it
Cleveland.
Indians
Yeah,
or
he got
Guardians?
traded in the Andrew Miller trade.
Yep.
I get him and Torres confused because they were both traded at the same time, but he was traded there from Cleveland in that trade. And in the big leagues, he's just never really found his footing. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. I think concussions have been a big problem for him.
Massive.
But yeah, but since he's been around, he has done pretty well in the big leagues. He's got a career. He's been a league above league average hitter in his career. In 2020, he was able to play 39 games, which was a pretty good portion of the season, and he put up a great line with a 150 WRC plus, put up 1.4 wins above replacement in 2020. 2021 dealt with the injuries again, but when he was playing, it was just dreadful. This past year, a 257 batting average on balls in play probably has a lot to do with that, which is well under what he's typically hit. So it's a pretty good guy to take a flyer on, and maybe you can get a bat out of that really takes off because he has a pedigree of being good in the past, especially as a prospect, and um, it's one of those kind of buy low type things that could work out. Jan Gomes is a guy who veteran catcher. Um, I don't know what this means for the Cubs because they obviously have Contreras still. But Jan Gomes is a guy who he probably should be a backup catcher at this stage, or at least a time splitting catcher. Maybe they decide to play Contreras in the field a little bit, maybe out in the outfield, left fielder or something. Maybe a little bit of first base with Rizzo not there anymore.
And a
Um,
possible DH even.
Possible DH depending on how that goes. So Young Gomes is definitely more of a defensive catcher. At least he has been, the past couple of years. Still put up a league average slash line in 2020. 2021, he was a midseason trade, I believe, to Oakland.
Yeah.
Um, and from Washington, and he was just okay this year. Put up 1.6 WAR. Solid defender, veteran catcher. You can never go wrong with signing a veteran catcher. And I believe his deal was what 2 years, 13 million. Is that what it was?
Yep.
Yeah. and it has a club option. So, but the big one here is Marcus Stroman. Um, Marcus Stroman is a little bit of a polarizing type guy, personality wise, which is kind of a thing to look for a team that doesn't really have an identity right now going into a rebuild. Um, which is probably a good thing for the Cubs. They need somebody with a little bit of attitude to bring into that rebuild. Um, and he's a guy that put up a great year this year. I'm really surprised at how weak his contract he got was. I was assuming he'd be at least 5 year guy. He's not very old. He's only 30. This will be his age 31 season, so it's not like a 35, 36 year old that's going to get a really short deal. And the AAV at 71 million dollars total for the contract, it puts it at $23.7 million, which is fairly low for a guy like Marcus Stroman on a short contract. So definitely interesting. Had one of his best year last year in 2019, but I mean, sorry, a year before last, 2019, splitting time between Toronto and New York, and then this past year was really solid in New York. So definitely a guy who's a great ground ball pitcher. Um, he's increased his strikeout rate a little bit since he got to New York, which has been a big deal for him. And I mean, his results, his last two full seasons speak for themselves. A sub three, a 3.22 ERA 2019 and a 3.02 ERA in 2021. So, but this is definitely a guy who you build around him with an infield defense that is really good, and that's something that we're yet to see from the Cubs. As they currently have Patrick Wisdom and Frank Schwindel at the corners. So, um, we'll see how that ends up working out for them. They definitely will need to work on their infield defense. But this is a good signing for them. It does feel kind of weird time frame wise because as currently constructed, unless they sign two or three more really good players in free agency, as currently constructed, they're not a very good team. So by the time Marcus Stroman leaves in 3 years, it might have just been, it might not work. It might not really work out for them. It might just be paying a guy to be there during some lean years, but we'll see what ends up happening with that. And obviously, there's yet to be done, stuff yet to be done this offseason. So
Yeah, it is interesting that I did think that the contract for the length of time, at least, I thought he would get at least a 4, maybe even a 5 year deal. Um, I didn't know if he was going to get much of an more of an AAV. I thought I had right around 24, 25 for him, anyways. Um, it is just interesting the way that it all happened. There wasn't much smoke about it. He was very vocal on on Twitter about him not having the offers that he thought he should have and the interest he thought he should have prior to the lockout. And then it kind of just all came together with the Cubs at the last minute for him. I think it was like the day before the lockout. So it's going to be interesting to see, like you said, especially with their infield defense, which they have Wisdom, Schwindel. They also have Nick Madrigal and Nico Horner as their starting middle infield at the moment. That's also not great. There are rumors, even though there's the lockout, there are some rumors about the Cubs really being interested in wanting to get into the Carlos Correa market. So if that, that's going to be really interesting if that were to happen. But it is more interesting because it doesn't feel like the Cubs are that particularly close. It feels like they just kind of went in the other direction of the, like, hey, let's go to the more of a rebuild area. But then now we also want to we want to get right back into the free agency market, sign one of the top starting pitchers. If we do sign one of the top shortstops now, sign a good backup catcher, but are we going to potentially trade Contreras? Because after the Gomes signing, there was a lot of rumors that Contreras was going to be on the market already, and he's already been shopped the past couple years already. Um, the Frazier deal is interesting because he does come with more club control. I think he's controlled until 2025 because he was DFA'd by the Yankees. So you get some control with him at least. Um, it's just going to be completely interesting. It feels like it's a weird, because of the lockout and all the moves have stopped. It feels like a weird area that the Cubs are in, that they're kind of in that gray area. They're not really bad enough to be in the rebuild, but they're not really technically good enough to be a team that you could count on to be make a deep postseason run or potential World Series contender. So there's definitely some holes left to fill there.
Yeah, one more note on them is that a couple of their guys that I feel like the Cubs may be overvaluing a couple of their guys that came up and played well this year, like Schwindel and Wisdom. because I really think that a lot of that was a little bit of a mirage. Especially I think that they both have a chance to be good big leaguers, but I think both of them are a little bit of you know batted ball luck. Neither one of them have very good plate discipline, and I don't think they can keep up what they did in this in their year this year, their first years this year, long term. So, maybe they do, maybe I'm wrong. But it feels like they're gonna take a step back and even if you go out and sign a Carlos Correa, which would be huge for this team, there's still a lot of empty space on this team because you look at their bullpen, they have some decent looking pitchers on their bullpen, but they don't really have many name guys. And you look at their lineup. I mean, this is an outfield that's going to start Ian Happ, Jason Hayward, and I guess they're probably going to start unless they sign
Frazier.
somebody. Frazier. I mean, and Frazier is a guy who's played like a career high of like 65 games or something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're looking at, like Rafael Ortega, journeyman, who had
Hmm.
a good year this year when he played. But I mean, I definitely think that, I mean, for the Cubs to be, they're going to have to go out. They're going to have to sign Correa plus. They're going to have to
Yeah.
sign Correa plus a Schwarber plus another pitcher, and they do still have Hendricks, but they're gonna have to go out and sign, a couple bullpen pieces, and they're gonna have to trade for some guys too, because I mean they do have a pretty deep farm system now. I mean there are a ton of things they're gonna have to do, and when you look at Marcus Stroman's contract, 3 years, it's gonna be difficult for them to put a they can put a competitive-ish team on the field, especially in that division, within 3 years, even this coming up year, they could put a competitive team, but they're not going to put a World Series contender out there for 3 or 4 years at least. I mean,
Right.
it's just the fact of the matter. Even if they, went all in on free agents, I don't think you could add, unless you added like the top four free agents on the market right now to this team. I don't think they'd be like a legit World Series contender this year. So we'll see what happens though. And I think that part of Marcus Stroman's decision, I don't think he really cared. I think he just wanted. I think he wanted to play in Chicago, and he wanted to play for the Cubs. So,
Yeah.
um,
That
that's
is
what
part of
it's
it.
all sounded like. So, good for him. It's kind of similar to like that Manny Machado decision. He wanted to play in Southern California, and the Padres gave him a really good offer, and he said, "Okay, well, even though they're not good yet, I'll go there." So,
Yeah.
um, but the timing does feel kind of weird to me. So.
Yeah, it does for sure. But like once this lockout ends, we'll get a ton of those questions answered for sure. But we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. Was a little bit of a smaller deal, but that's James Paxton signing a 1 year, $10 million with the Boston Red Sox. That actually has a 2 year club option on it.
Yeah, this deal makes a lot of sense for both sides when you look at the way it's structured. Boston needs a pitcher to replace Eduardo Rodriguez, and James Paxton is a pitcher that can be really, really good. James Paxton never stays healthy. So he's pitched 21 innings in the last 2 seasons, and his career high in innings pitched is 160. He's never made 30 starts. I mean, he's had a couple seasons where he was an ace level pitcher, like in 2017 when he put up in 136 innings, put up a 298 ERA with a 261 FIP and 4.4 wins above replacement. But, um, he's a guy that just can't stay healthy. And, um, if you're the Red Sox, you give him this 1 year deal with a 2 year club option. That if he's able to stay healthy this year, you get that ability to sign him to a 2 year deal easily. And if you can cut your ties with him if he doesn't do well. So it makes sense. I do worry a little bit from their standpoint of it almost feels like it could be just throw it away $10 million, but we'll see what ends up happening. So
I mean, to me, there's never really a bad 1 year deal in my eyes, and that I'm viewing it as a 1 year deal right now. And if Paxton proves to be worth more than that, then they're going to pick up the option. If he proves to be more of the injury risk and they don't see it, then it's a whatever for a team. Like the 1 year deals. I don't think it really matters much. I mean, how much you end up paying those guys. because you're assuming the risk anyways on a 1-year deal with a pitcher, especially a guy who pitched 1 inning last year. You're basically betting that he won't do anything, and you're hoping that he does. So
Yeah.
that's the way it looks at that one. But we'll go ahead and move on to the next one, and that's with Raisel Iglesias re-signing with the Angels on a 4-year, $58 million deal.
Yeah, this made a lot of sense. The Angels are a team that needed bullpen help, and losing your top reliever is would not have helped their bullpen. So definitely a good thing for them to bring him back. You look at the fact that he had his best year of his career this year. A 2.57 ERA. In 70 innings was one of the most used relievers. He had a fantastic year, 34 saves. He's been a good pitcher for a long time. He had one pretty mediocre year back in 2019 with Cincinnati. But other than that, I mean, he's had a sub 2.5 ERA every year since his rookie year, just about. So, which was 2015, and he's always been a really reliable relief pitcher. When he was in Cincinnati or in LA with the Angels. So, um, I mean, this is a really good relief pitcher, and he deserves every bit of this 4-year contract. And I'm really surprised that people don't talk about him in a better light than they do, because this guy he's borderline elite reliever and has been for a long time, and he's never gets talked about in the same category as some of the more elite relievers out there. So he was non-tendered last year, or
He
traded
was
for.
traded.
Yeah, he was traded for a very weak return last year.
Yeah.
So.
He was traded for like Noe Ramirez, who was ended up like being DFA'd pretty soon after, into the beginning of the season. But I absolutely agree. Raisel Iglesias has been one of those underrated relief pitchers for his entire major league career. He's been one of my favorite relief pitchers to watch over, the time he's been in the major leagues. He's kind of got a little bit of a little sidearm delivery, but he throws absolute gas. I think he throws up to like 97 even with that. Um, he's just like you said, he's been consistent. I mean, he's a sub 3 ERA, pretty much relief pitcher every year of his major league career outside of 2019 and his rookie season, where he pitched 95 innings that rookie year, and his ERA was a 4.15, but his FIP was a 3.55 even. So he absolutely deserves everything of this contract. It's a great move for the Angels. I think they did offer, they kind of hamstrung his market by offering him the qualifying offer, and with not many teams are going to want to spend that money and a draft pick on a relief pitcher, especially one who's 31 years old, going to be 32 probably when the season starts. So it made all the sense in the world for him to return to the Angels, and I'm glad that the Angels gave him a contract that was fair market value for a guy that he what he probably should deserve anyways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next move we had was a head scratching move when you look at it, by the names on it, but once you start diving in a little bit more, it makes a little bit more sense. But that's the Boston Red Sox trading outfielder Hunter Renfroe to the Milwaukee Brewers for outfielder Jackie Bradley Jr. and prospects David Hamilton and Alex Benelis.
Yeah, we'll start with Hunter Renfroe, and the Brewers getting a guy that can hit in this case, and a guy who can hit for power. And the Brewers' offense was really a downfall for them this past year. And getting a little bit more power in that outfield is going to help them.
And they lost
Especially, I was
Avisail
about to say,
Garcia.
especially they just lost their best hitter from this past year too, in Avisail Garcia. So, you're bringing in a guy who hit 31 home runs. You know, he's cut his strikeout rate a lot over the past couple years. He's all the way down to a 22% strikeout rate. And he's not walking a ton still, but he's a guy who he's kind of your classic like corner outfield slugger who's not a great defender, not a great not a great on base guy, but he can really hit the ball a long way, and that's what you're getting in Hunter Renfroe. We'll see maybe with the DH if that ends up being a thing this year. That could make the movie look even better because Hunter Renfroe probably could be, uh, you know, I mean he's had a couple years where he was decent defensively, but he's probably more of a DH. Um, looking at him as a guy who could definitely help them. They traded away Jackie Bradley Jr., which was probably more to do with cost than anything else. Um, and Jackie Bradley Jr. reuniting with the Red Sox, interestingly enough, um, just uh, he's a weird player. He's had a couple of seasons that were so good, both ways. He's always been a good defender, but offensively, there's been times where he has been just unplayably bad. And this past year was one of those times. I mean, you look at a guy, putting up a really good defensive season this past year. In fact, it was the best defensive season of his career, or ever since 2014 for him, and still put up minus .8 WAR because he was so dreadful offensively. A 35 WRC plus in 430 plate appearances this past year, one of the worst in the big leagues at the plate. Um, but he's had a few years where he was closer to league average at the plate, and he's had a couple years back in 2015, 2016 where he was really good at the plate. So, maybe this is a guy who in Boston was definitely better than he's been in Milwaukee. So maybe they can unlock something and figure something back out, and he can have a little bit of a resurgence late in his career. He's 32 years old. Um, so maybe a tiny bit more upside than your typical guy you would get in a trade like this. But the big thing for the Red Sox was getting two pretty decent prospects and David Hamilton and Alex Benelas.
Yeah, so both of those prospects, they're overall both affording future value on Fangraphs, but there's been a lot of rave reviews um, that people have been reporting from a lot of scouts through over that they believe those guys are probably better than what what it says on paper. Um, and to get that also with a guy like Jackie Bradley Jr. taking on that $12 million contract, um, they sounds like a really good deal for the Red Sox. You get a guy back in your system, and Jackie Bradley Jr., who, like you said, has had some really good years there, and hopefully you can just pretty much you know get him back to what he was. I mean, even in 2020 when he was there, he had a really good season, a 283 average, a 360 on base, 119 WRC plus. That is in the shortened season. That was in 55 games, but still, if you can get Jackie Bradley back to doing what he always did in Boston, I think that's kind of just what you would take. And for the Brewers, it makes sense because he gets you're getting an offensive slugger, and he has a couple years of control where Bradley was, I think his contract was up after this year and had an option year to where if you wanted that, but you get a guy who's straight up still in arbitration for 2 more years. And maybe he could fill the void of what Garcia did, and it's kind of an addition by subtraction. Maybe you're getting rid of a guy who was so bad offensively that maybe that helps your team even some more, even though you're not getting as much production from Renfroe as what you would be getting from a guy like Avisail Garcia. So it's pretty interesting, on the surface looking at it that way, but once you dive deep down in it, it does make even a little bit more sense for both of these teams, really.
Yeah, for sure. So our next move is one that I really like, and it is that Corey Knable is heading to Philadelphia on a 1-year, $10 million deal.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense for the Phillies. They have struggled with that bullpen for the past couple years. They've tried to sign guys like David Robinson that didn't really work out. They've signed a couple other guys who really haven't worked out either. Knable is a legitimate closer in baseball. He's probably a better setup man, but still he can be an elite closer. You look back at the year, what was it? It was 2017 when he was the closer for Milwaukee. 39 saves, 76 innings that year with a 178 ERA and a 253 FIP. Even in, then they had Josh Hader starting to come up. So they kind of used Hader as a closer sometimes, and Knable sometimes as a closer. In 2018, he still had a really good year, 358 ERA, 55 innings. 2019, I think he ended up having Tommy John there at the end of 2018, missed all of 2019, came back in 2020, didn't really look that great, was ended up being traded to the Dodgers. And he looked pretty good with the Dodgers this year. He did have I think it was a lat strain that took him out for a good chunk of the season. But he ended up coming back, pitching 25 innings with a 245 ERA, a 290 FIP. He was even an opener in some of those playoff games. So it's pretty much he's going to get into the closing role there in Houston, or not Houston, with Philadelphia, with Hector Neris moving on to Houston. So it's going to be really interesting to see if they can fill in that bullpen to bridge the gap to Knable, because that's something they've really struggled with the past couple years. But if they can get Knable locking down that ninth inning, maybe if they can find a way to bridge that, the Phillies could get themselves into that division battle some more.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of that. Corey Knable is a guy who has definitely been better this past year. I think he came back from injury in 2020. I think he had Tommy John surgery in late 2018.
Yeah.
He struggled in 2020 in the shortened season coming back from injury, but this past year when he was healthy was pretty good. I'm with you. I definitely think of him as more of as a setup guy, but he's also a closer when you're last year you had Ian Kennedy closing your games in 2020. So I mean in 2021 you had Ian Kennedy closing. So I mean it's definitely a case where you need some help in that bullpen, and he's probably going to step in and immediately be their best reliever. So, um, which is still a little bit of a scary thought as Corey Knable being your only good reliever right now. But you never know; they might find some. Most good relievers are found through waiver claims and converted starters and stuff like that. So that's definitely something to look at. And but yeah, definitely a good signing for Philly. They desperately needed something like this.
Yeah, for Philly fans, I mean, their bright spot could be that their best reliever had been Hector Neris for the past couple years, and now you're going to Corey Knable, so that's an immediate automatic upgrade. Um, so if there's a little bright spot there, it's that. But we'll go ahead and move on to our last free agency deal we've at least had happen so far, and that's with Chris Taylor re-signing with the LA Dodgers on a 4-year, $60 million deal.
Yeah, and Chris Taylor's a really solid player. We talked about him a lot, coming into free agency, and he's a guy that has always put up pretty good numbers. High strikeout guy, which can be a little bit frustrating at times, but he's got a good plate discipline, walks a pretty good amount. Got that patience that all the Dodgers have. Hits for some power, hits lefties extremely well, and can play just about anywhere on the field at a pretty high level. So with Kike Hernandez leaving for Boston last year, um, he's somebody who was desperately needed to stay in LA. Needing that utility guy that plays that Kike Hernandez role, and Chris Taylor is going to be able to do that. If you ever have an injury, say Justin Turner has to miss, a couple weeks or something, you can throw him at third base. Say, you're going to be a little bit weaker in the middle infield with Seager gone, so he can play second or short whenever you need him to. Need a lefty to hit in the outfield for a game or two. You got a guy. So, um, he's definitely a guy that's really going to help them out. And I mean, he's somebody they probably really needed to bring back. So good signing for the Dodgers.
Yeah, especially you mentioned the Kike Hernandez leaving last year, um, to go to Boston to get that more of a full time role. Taylor could have easily done that. He had bigger contract offers to go other places and be a full time everyday player. I think even one of them was in Seattle, where he was originally drafted and then traded to the Dodgers later on. But he chose to go back to the Dodgers and take a little less money to go back and play, that utility type role. It's one that he really thrives in. It's one he actually enjoys a lot, being able to play a bunch of different positions and not be locked in at one different position. Um, and with the losing Corey Seager this year, I had said that Seager all along with our little conversations out and to all of our friends that Taylor was the second most important signing behind Corey Seager to me. Like, he is just so much of an important player to this team with everything he does. By playing all those different positions, playing all of them really well. I mean, he's not an elite level defensive third baseman, but he still plays it at a slightly maybe below league average or league average level, defensively, and his offense. He's a guy who can carry a team at times. I mean, look at in the wild card game, he had the big walk off homer. In one of the other playoff games, he had or one of the other games later on, he had a 3-homer game. It's just he just seems to always have those clutch moments for this team, and he's a guy who was desperately needed back.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely good on the Dodgers for bringing him back. But got to move on now. You know, that's pretty much all the major free agent signings we had. There are a few other ones, but you know, they weren't quite as big. You know, a couple of minor leagues free agent signing type guys, um, and you know, some other little stuff. But the two other pretty big moves that we had, which these actually have come after the lockout because they're in coaching. And the first one that we want to talk about is Buck Showalter being hired as the manager of the New York Mets.
Yeah, this is a very Mets move if I've ever seen one. Um, a guy who has been out of managing since 2018 when he was with the Baltimore Orioles. He's been on basically, I think, MLB Network ever since then. 65-year-old manager has almost a five or just a little over 500 record in his career. Most of that's because of the really bad couple teams he had in Baltimore the last couple years. But I Showalter, I mean, he's a good manager, but I just don't think that he's a manager that's going to thrive in today's game. I mean, I could be wrong. We've seen guys like Dusty Baker be able to come in and do it. We saw Tony La Russa, even with all of his troubles that he had in the clubhouse at the beginning of the year, he still put a winning team on the field. It's more probably of a stability factor of a guy who's going to come in a manager and be more of an even keeled guy rather than the young, energetic trying to come in and win over everybody. Showalter's not going to do that. He's going to have his ways of doing it. He's going to manage more of the old school style, and that might be beneficial to the team with with being more able to connect with those guys and have more of a everyday like set roles rather than hey kind of stuff's fluid, which you get with the younger managers and more analytic based things. I just don't think it's the best hire that they could have had. I out of their guys, I think maybe Joe Espada probably would have been a better guy. I even would have rather seen them bring back Carlos Beltran. It wouldn't have been the best in the media eyes, but I think that would have been a better move for them than hiring Buck Showalter.
Yeah, the one thing about this is I think that Buck Showalter in some situations would do just fine, but I really feel like the Mets are going to have an issue with clashing personalities in that clubhouse. You got some really strong personalities in there. Francisco Lindor's one, Max Scherzer's one, DeGrom's a pretty strong personality, um, and I just have a feeling that they're gonna clash.
Edwin
Um,
Diaz even.
Edwin Diaz can, yeah. I mean, it just feels like they're gonna have a. It feels like there's gonna be a lot of clashing, and I don't really think that Buck Showalter's the type of guy who's gonna help that. Because I do think that people that like him are a little bit more they're a little bit more set in their ways, as you said,
Hard
um,
nosed.
hard nosed, and they're probably not going to take quite as much from players, and I just don't think that's going to fit with what they have. So, um, definitely something that I think is pretty good for I think he could do a fine job for them. He's been sitting back and watching the last couple of years, but he's um, definitely going to be an interesting look there, and we'll see how it works out. So
Yeah, it's going to be is he going to clash with like kind of the same way LaRussa did with the players to begin the season, but then can he get them to buy in the way that Chicago kind of did later on? Kind of in the middle of summer, that's when the White Sox kind of flipped the switch and they kind of bought in more to the LaRussa method. And they were one of the best teams in baseball, since that point. But at the beginning of the year, there was a lot of controversy around it all. So it's going to be interesting to see that. I just I don't think it's going to turn out that great, to be honest. But
yeah, I I'd have to agree with that. I just don't think that clubhouse is put together very well. If you go look at a lot of the teams that have won in the last few years, um, the Dodgers. Look at this year's Braves team. Look at the Rays. Those clubhouses, those teams had a lot of chemistry, and those clubhouses, collectively were really good together. And I just don't know. And I think a lot of that has to do with the players that were put together, but also with the managers. And I just don't know if that's going to be the case here. And they really need a really good people manager to make it work. and I just don't know. I mean, and it could work out. I mean, Buck Showalter could do that. We don't know, but it's entirely possible that that could end up being the case. But but who knows? So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. So the other manager hiring we had was the Oakland A's. Just actually yesterday, formally announced Mark Kotze as their new manager. Kotze is a guy who, ever since he had retired, he went into coaching with the A's as a bench coach, I believe, in 2015 and 2016. Then he ended up becoming a quality control coach for a few seasons for them. And then last year actually became their third base coach. Then with the departure of Bob Melvin this year, he was the odds-on favorite to become the manager, and they officially hired him yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a case where the the A's dropped Bob Melvin because they didn't want to pay him, and they're going to give another guy an opportunity because they're probably going into a rebuild, which is fine. And I think Mark Kotze is very well respected in baseball, and I think a lot of people like him. He was a player fairly recently, in the early 2010s, he was still playing on the field. He's a guy that was that played for the A's for a few years. Probably had his best seasons with the A's. Um, he played a long time. 1997, he was on the world champion Marlins team, and he played all the way till 2013. Had a 16-year career, which is pretty remarkable. Um, but he's a pretty solid player in his own right, and I think he'll do a pretty good job with the with the Oakland A's as a guy who um, I think is, I mean, it's gonna be hard to have a really good record there, but
Yeah.
I think he'll do a pretty good job for him. So
Yeah, I just hope that it's not one of those situations where, like, hey, we're just going to tab this guy as kind of like the lame duck manager, just like, hey, we know we're going to be bad, and then we're going to kind of blame you for us being bad a little bit, and then we're going to fire you in the in 2 or 3 seasons. Like, I really hope that's not the case because, like you said, Mark Kotze he's really well respected. He was even respected as a player. He was never that superstar, but he was a decent MLB player. And I hope that he gets his fair shot. One day, especially if he stays with Oakland, or if he decides to end up moving on, or they decide to move on for him, that he gets another shot somewhere with a team that is in a better shape. Because we're looking at an Oakland A's team that, if the lockout wasn't happening, we'd be talking about a potential Matt Olson trade or Matt Chapman trade or Sean Manaea getting traded. A team that's already lost Marcus Simeon, last year. Just they're going into that they're not going to be good at all. And I
yeah,
just feel like he's not going to get a fair shake out of it.
they're looking like the next Rangers. The Rangers are pulling out of it now. They've made some signings. They made some moves. He feels like the next Rangers group. So
Yep.
I mean, the thing about a manager like this going through a rebuild is that it can work out because I mean some teams have found their manager through a rebuild like this. I mean look at the Braves, Brian Snitker. He was brought in. A lot of people thought of him as a lame duck manager, and that he'd finish out the rebuild, then they go hire somebody else as soon as the team started to get good again. But when you look at them, Brian Snitker did a good job. Their record got better after he was after he was promoted, and then he's stuck with them, and they've won the division 4 years in a row, and they just won the World Series. So and he's won Manager of the Year. So you just never know. I don't think they're just gonna. I don't think they're gonna give him no shot. I don't think he'll get fired before unless something crazy happens. Until they might get to a situation where they decide not to renew his contract. When he gets there, but we'll see what happens. It's gonna be very interesting to see how Mark Kotze does and to see what direction the A's take on. They haven't taken on a true rebuild in a long time. So we'll see what direction they go. That's kind of become the wave recently. While the A's have kind of for the last 20 years or so have made their money off of playing money ball and putting a good product on the field every year with some more unknown names. It's kind of been their thing has been to kind of patch together a 80 to 90 win team every year with some sneaky signings and trades and not really have to rebuild. But this is looking like it's about to be a rebuild. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see for sure. Um, Now we just wanted to kind of hit on a little bit of the lockout talk of what we've heard. being reported through all of the baseball reporters or whatever. It doesn't seem like much movement of the core economics or anything is going to happen until, at least January, if not even, beginning of February. Hopefully not. But, um, it just seems like there's not really much movement. It doesn't seem like there's much urgency on each side, really. It seems like each side's just kind of really stuck on which way they want things to be, and there's just no real budging from either side.
Yeah, so the last, first off, I want to touch on the last couple days before the lockout. I think on both sides it was very inappropriate the way they treated it and publicly. Both sides were, and I'm not trying to place blame on players or owners or whatever. I'm just saying both sides. It was inappropriate to you've got the Major League Baseball hanging in the balance, the ability to have a 2022 season possibly. And I mean, you have the owners making ridiculous offers that there's no way they're going to happen. You have the players straight up walking out of meetings, and then the owners straight up walking out of meetings. I mean, that's all just a bunch of PR and stuff trying to make the other side feel like you're trying to get public relations on their side. And then of course you have it right as soon as the lockout started, you have the everything on like MLB.com and stuff getting pulled down player wise, all the players having ghost heads. I mean, it's both sides is just like and a lot of it's been on the Major League Baseball side, but I mean, it really feels inappropriate the way things have been done. And at a certain point, somebody's going to have to come to a concession. I mean, the players need to understand that, you know, a lot of owners, like it or not, are in it to make money. And, not every owner is going to spend an absolute ton and get rid of. So stuff like, if you're wanting a salary floor, you're probably going to have to go to a little bit more of a cap. I mean, it's probably just going to happen. I mean, if you're going to try to, if you're going to want to take out some um, if you want to take out some years of free agency in certain situations, then something's going to change. Something you're not gonna just automatically get that because and then from the owner's standpoint, you've got to quit playing just these goofy games and stuff like the taking everybody's pictures down and making ridiculous offers that are there's no way are going to happen. I mean, so this whole thing, it's two sides. The owner is probably a little bit more acting like childs, like acting like children. Um, Definitely the owners being more so on that, but um, I just hope that both sides understand that nothing good comes out of doing nothing. And the players don't get paid, they don't get to play, the fans are deprived more than anybody else, the owners lose all kinds of money revenue that they would get. I mean, so somebody's going to have to come to a concession. I think baseball has the most player friendly collective bargaining, or had the most player friendly rules out of any organization. And the owners are going to have to realize that that's the way things have been for a long time, and you're not just going to be able to change that. I mean, like other sports have a salary cap. That doesn't mean baseball is going to have a salary cap. You're probably not going to be able to just do that. So I think if you go down the list and you look at the owners, I mean, I feel like there really needs to be some movement happen soon, and but we'll see what happens. So
Yeah, it's come down to the past couple years. This last CBA and even the one before it, really, it was more sided towards the owners. The players kind of got taken to the woodshed over the past couple CBAs, and that's widely known. And it seems like the owners are like, hey, well, it's not our fault that you had agreed to this stuff, and we don't want to give any of it back. And the players rightfully are like, well, we're understanding that this isn't what we all thought it would be, and that it's not as, it's not, we need to change it. And that, I mean, that's why they do these CBA agreements for so many years, so that it can change and stuff can be bargained and whatever. But it just seems like it's a it's a stone wall meeting a stone wall here. It's like there's neither side wants to make much movement on what they really want. The owners don't want to change what it is. The players understand that they want everything to change, and the players are like, well, we're not going to concede any of what we want to change, and the owners are like, well, we're not going to give you anything back. And I think they both do realize that they need the baseball season, especially since we're just coming off of 2020 where it was a shortened season. We didn't have fans in the stands. The revenue was lost. The money was lost there. I think the owners understand, like, hey, that can't happen again. And they're being really reluctant. But I think at the end of the day, the players even know this. Like, dude, look, that happened, and that's going to happen again if you don't pull, if you don't come to an agreement with us. And I think the players are going to end up holding that over the owner's head, and we might see a more of a player friendly deal than we might have if 2020 didn't happen. Just because of that, like, with 2021, we didn't even have full capacity stands everywhere all the time, and the owners, they could still fill that some.
Yeah, and like I say, I mean, you have to, you're gonna have to concede some things on both sides. I mean, but like I said, the fact of the matter is, I think the owners have been able to get away with these last couple CBAs just because the MLB rules are unbelievably player friendly. What other sport are we seeing teams with multiple contracts at $300 million? I mean, you've in the NFL you've seen maybe one. I mean, nobody's getting $30 million a year in any other sport. So, like, I, I just I mean, I don't know. And from the owner's perspective, I mean, you're right. And the fact that, and this is the shame for it all, is that if this does carry on and we start to get real talk about right now, it's not a big deal. I don't think. I mean, right now, like nobody, and you look back on this year, nobody's going to care if someone signed on December 22nd or January 22nd. When you get down into into 20 into the starting to threaten spring training, and if you start to miss part of spring training, that's going to be such a big PR hit for baseball in general, because I know that back in 1994 when it expired and they didn't play a World Series, there were millions of baseball fans that quit watching the game in general because they looked at it as a bunch of rich owners you know not not paying people what they should get paid, and a bunch of players who are getting paid millions of dollars, crying about not getting paid more money. I think that's the way people look at it, both on both sides. It's a bunch of rich people squabbling, and I think that that hurts PR. And this season of Major League Baseball, there were so many good things that happened for the momentum of the game this year. There was the Field of Dreams game that got one of the highest rated regular season games in years. You had a postseason that had a lot of parity and a fantastic ratings all postseason. I mean, it was one of those things that you cannot, if you're on both sides, you cannot afford to take that PR hit after the season that happened this year. That wonderful season we just had after COVID, it was one of the best seasons of baseball ever to a lot of people, and you're just kind of ruin that by not by squabbling over things. And I really think that they need to come to something. I think that it needs to happen by the end of January. It really does, or it starts to become a big news story and it becomes a problem. So we'll see what happens. I think I think that we were going to talk quickly about the last couple weeks. There have been a couple little meetings, but most of them have been brief, and the reports have been they were maybe trying to get some momentum by talking about some of the smaller things, probably some more of the like in-game rule change type things, like the DH or stuff like that. That's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, like the money stuff is. That maybe could help. Maybe agreeing on some of those things could help get you some momentum moving forward. But we'll see. I mean, it's pretty rough right now, I think.
It is rough, and I don't think that it's going to be turn around anytime soon. I think I mean, everyone would like it to be done by the end of January, but I don't see that happening. Really, I mean, the game needs it to be, but I just don't think that it will be because of how much bad blood there is between the owners and the players right now. And I don't think it's completely fair to compare what baseball does to what football does or what NBA does. It's completely different. baseball has way many, or way more games. They have much more volume of games. They have the amount of fans that they bring in over the year is more. They have their regional sports deals. um, each team has their own TV contract as well. It's completely different than what the other sports are, and it's not. I don't think there's a fair way to really say, well, look, NFL doesn't have 300, multiple $30 million
Right. I
guys, and
don't.
baseball does,
Yeah.
but
I don't
it's
disagree completely with that. I'm just saying in
it,
general, like salary cap. There's no salary cap in baseball. That's kind of the
right.
big
And
thing. There's a
there's
salary cap in every sport outside of soccer in the world, and not in baseball. I mean, that's kind of the thing that that's the limiting factor for contracts. Typically, is the fact that you can't fit it into your cap, and now teams can spend as much as they want to.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't that's not going to change. Like that's the thing in the whole, like, maybe the salary floor thing, but what the owners are wanting, they're like, "Oh, well, we'll give you a salary floor, but like we want the revenue to be different. Like we want the people who exceed the luxury tax to pay the additional, like, $30 million it's going to take the team from spending $70 million to $100 million." And like that, the players don't care about that. Like, yeah, that doesn't matter, but the owners think it's such a big chip or whatever, or they think the universal DH is a much bigger chip, bargaining chip, than what it really is. Like, it's going to take both sides realizing that some of their chips aren't as big as what they think it is, and the other chips that they think are so big aren't as big as what they think it is. Like, the players are going to have to know, like, they know the universal DH, everybody wants it, but the owners are thinking it's such a big chip when it's really not. And then, like, they're the players expanded playoffs, they think that's such a big chip for the owners in reality when it's really not. Like, some of these things that people, they're trying to overplay right now, and they're going to come to a time, hopefully it's soon, hopefully it's in January, where they realize it's not as big as what we thought it is.
Yeah, and the one thing that really does hurt through this bargaining is obviously that those issues aren't going away in the very near future, but something that's kind of going on everywhere is that you have players that are currently getting really hurt by this. I saw something today that Charlie Morton, who was famously injured in the first inning of the World Series, or not the first inning, but like second inning of the game one of the World Series this year. He had a broken leg and he can't even speak. He can't even send his X-rays to the Braves doctors without the fear that he's going to get them in trouble.
Well, look
Um,
at look at Zach
so
Britton, who, a pitcher for the Yankees on the 40-man roster. He's technically, under the current rules, can't even talk to his brother because his brother is a minor league manager in for Baltimore. Like, that's completely ridiculous. I mean, I'm sure they're still going to talk and stuff, but like, under the rules, he technically can't speak to his own brother because of it, like, without getting him in trouble or getting either one of them in trouble. Like,
yeah,
it's just
it's
ridiculous.
yeah. But anyways, but yeah, we'll hope to have news that comes up soon. But just to close us out, I just wanted to. We talked so much about the free agency, but the lockout. But after the lockout ends, we'll have a lot of free agents that big free agents left to sign. These are the top ones that didn't make it. And it didn't sign a contract before the lockout. That's Freddie Freeman, Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Kyle Seager, Carlos Correa, um, Trevor Story, Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, Michael Conforto, Nelson Cruz, Carlos Rodon, Clayton Kershaw, Zach Greinke, Eddie Rosario, Tommy Pham, Jorge Soler, and Kenley Jansen. These are all guys we're expecting to get pretty decent contract offers that haven't signed yet. So as soon as that lockout ends, there are still a lot of guys left out there. And hopefully that lockout ends pretty soon because these guys will get stranded and not have a place to go come come spring training or maybe even the start of the regular season if that doesn't get handled soon.
Yeah, and on top of that, you have the trade market, which is supposed to have guys like Luis Castillo, Sonny Gray, Matt Olson,
Yeah.
Sean Manaea, Matt Chapman. I mean, there's even others that I didn't mention there, but there's still a lot of moves to be made, either free agency wise or trade market wise. But everything, like we said, has been on this hold because of this lockout. And the sad part is we don't even know, going forward how much information we're going to get and what kind of shows we're even going to be able to bring because of the lack of information and the lack of movement from everything. I mean, we just covered, we're going to wrap up all of our free agency and trade stuff that happened, and basically we're going to be going into this, starting the new year with just basically trying to manufacture stories to talk about, which kind of really sucks.
Yep.
But um, we'll try and figure something out. We might do a smaller episode next week that we've been working on, and maybe it's not as much baseball talk, but we'll figure that out next week. But thank you guys for tuning in and dealing with us through that 2-week hiatus, 3-week hiatus we really had, and we'll try and get back to starting this new year and with more consistent episodes.
Yep. We'll be here, and we'll try not to take a 3-week break again. So
Yeah, don't recommend getting the flu for anybody.
yeah.
That will take you out for about 2 to 3 weeks.
Yep.
But thank you guys for tuning into this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.